As the sun rose over the Philippine Sea on October 25, 1944, the crew of USS St breathed a collective sigh of relief. They had just survived a brutal clash with Japan's most powerful naval force, dodging salvos from the colossal and legendary battleship Yamato. Exhausted but alive, the men tried to shake off the tension of battle. Some headed below decks for a hard-earned breakfast, while others tidied their quarters or prepared for routine operations. The worst, they believed, was behind them. Suddenly, the ship's general quarters alarm pierced the morning calm. Confusion rippled across the decks as sailors scrambled back to their stations, hearts racing. They braced themselves, expecting to see the Japanese fleet returning on the horizon, guns poised for another onslaught. From the cover of a nearby rain squall, a single A6M5 Zero fighter emerged. It streaked towards St at full speed, showing no signs of breaking off or veering away. As the distance closed rapidly, the crew watched in disbelief. This was no ordinary attack run. The aircraft came screaming down on a collision course with the ship. USS St was about to become one of the first victims of Japan's terrifying new tactic, the divine wind, the fury of the kamikaze. Initially laid down as Chapin Bay on January 23, 1943, USS Midway was commissioned into the United States Navy on October 23rd, just 9 months after construction began. She was part of a fleet of warships known as escort carriers, a concept developed before the United States entered World War II. Her class, the Casablanca, marked the first purpose-designed and built escort carriers for the Navy. Despite their basic nature and focus on rapid production, these sister ships improved upon their predecessors, featuring larger flight decks, longer hangar decks, and great aviation capabilities. Designed with durability in mind, their machinery spaces were well distributed, enhancing their speed and maneuverability. However, these carriers also had a significant weakness: armor protection. The compact design left no space for substantial armor plating, making them vulnerable to enemy attacks. When Midway went to war, she quickly proved her worth in the Pacific theater. Thrust into intense combat from June to September 1944, she and her crew earned 3 battle stars in rapid succession. At Saipan, Tinian, Morotai, and the Palaus, she and her crew quickly developed a reputation for skill and dedication, and the ship's air group proved adept at both anti-submarine warfare and supporting amphibious operations. Most importantly, her pilots struck with precision, paving the way for the next phase of the Pacific campaign. Yet, as Midway prepared to join the fight against Japan, Captain Francis J. McKenna received notice on June 10, 1944, that his ship would henceforth be known as USS St, named after a battle in the Normandy campaign. The change was practical. The name Midway was being reserved for a new, larger fleet carrier under construction. However, the news was not well received at all, as old naval tales spoke about the bad luck that came with renaming a ship, which was sure to bring misfortune. On October 12th, St departed Seidler Harbor, bound for the liberation of Leyte. The operation represented a crucial step in the Allied strategy to retake the Philippines and cut off Japan's resource lifeline. Tasked with providing air cover and close support during the bombardment and amphibious landings, the ship arrived off Leyte on October 18th. Operating under Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague with the escort carrier group Taffy 3, St joined 6 other escort carriers and a screen of 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts. The group's mission was vital to the success of the landing operations, as they would be the first line of defense against any Japanese counterattack. From October 18th to 24th, St aircraft launched relentless strikes against enemy installations and airfields on Leyte and Samar as the ship patrolled off the eastern coasts of both islands. Her crew remained vigilant, ready to strike at any moment. Before dawn on October 25th, USS St, steaming about 60 nautical miles east of Samar Island, had 4 aircraft roar off her deck, launching the day's anti-submarine patrol. Nearby, the rest of Taffy 3's carriers readied themselves for airstrikes on the Leyte landing beaches. For 8 relentless days now, the task force supported the Leyte landings, operating like a well-oiled and seasoned machine. At precisely 6:47 a.m., Ensign Bill Brooks, piloting one of St.'s TBF Avengers, radioed an urgent report. A massive Japanese force approaching Taffy 3 from the west-northwest, only 17 nautical miles away. Initially, Task Force Commander Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague received Brooks' message with disbelief. Irritated, Ziggy, as he was known, demanded positive identification, convinced some overeager rookie had mistaken friendly forces for the enemy, and resumed the planning of another day of patrols and airstrikes. Brooks, undeterred, flew in for a closer look. His next transmission left no room for doubt, as he responded, quote, "I can see pagoda masts. I see the biggest meatball flag on the biggest battleship I ever saw." As the morning haze burned away, distinct shapes materialized on the horizon, and the full force of the enemy became clearer. Taffy 3 had stumbled upon one of the 3 main Japanese naval groups in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita led this powerful armada, consisting of 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and 12 destroyers, all advancing menacingly. At the center of the formation sailed Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, with 18.1-inch main guns that outgunned the entire Taffy 3 fleet. On paper, the outcome was certain. Outgunned, outnumbered, and slower than their adversaries, Taffy 3 faced overwhelming odds. Yet, in the face of certain defeat, the ships of this task force all turned to confront the enemy, prepared to give the Japanese force a fight they'd never forget. Suddenly, a cluster of dark anti-aircraft bursts erupted to the northwest, clear evidence that the approaching force wasn't made up of American battleships. And while the enemy gunners targeted the pilot who had just spotted them, Brooks retaliated, diving in and releasing his payload on an enemy cruiser. Unfortunately, his payload consisted of 2 depth charges, barely scratching the surface of the heavily armored vessel. Following Brooks' daring move, the entire anti-submarine patrol from St, all also equipped only with depth charges, hurled themselves at the leading edge of the enemy fleet, but were soon driven back by a storm of anti-aircraft fire. At 6:58 a.m., streaks of Japanese anti-aircraft fire lit up the sky, followed by the deep, resonant booms of large naval guns. Yamato, the largest warship afloat, had opened fire from 17 nautical miles away, unleashing her massive 18-inch guns, followed by her others. The most powerful guns Taffy 3 had at its disposal were its aircraft. But in a direct firefight, all the smaller ships could rely on were 5-inch guns and a mix of 40 and 20mm caliber cannons. For nearly 3 hours, the outnumbered and outgunned ships of Taffy 3 played a fierce cat-and-mouse game, with the American forces constantly shifting course to dodge the rain of shells. As the waters around St. and the surrounding American ships erupted in chaos, with the enormous enemy shells crashing into the sea, each impact was marked by towering splashes, vibrantly dyed in reds, greens, and blues. These bursts of color swirled through the smoke and spray, creating a terrifying yet surreal spectacle as the enemy tried to zero in on their targets. The psychedelic spectacle prompted one American sailor to quip, quote, "They're shooting at us in Technicolor." Despite the show, the American ship's commanders quickly adapted, throwing a smokescreen and turning into the spots where the enemy shells had just struck, knowing the Japanese gunners would likely correct their aim and target elsewhere. This daring tactic threw off the enemy's precision, buying the American ships precious moments in the chaotic battle. As the range between ships drew closer than ever, the battle grew in intensity, with the destroyers and destroyer escorts of Taffy 3 firing as close as 5,000 yards. Aware that a single hit from an enemy battleship could spell doom for his small escort carrier, Captain McKenna maneuvered St. Lo through rain squalls to hide from the watchful eyes of Japanese rangefinders, skillfully weaving through a barrage of enemy shells. Others were not so lucky, such as destroyer Johnston. Led by Captain Ernest Evans, she made a bold charge against the Japanese fleet, damaging a Japanese cruiser with gunfire and torpedoes and nearly hitting a battleship. When the ship was hit by one of the massive 18-inch shells from Yamato, Johnston and her crew continued to fight valiantly until she sank. Through the actions of Johnston and the sacrifices of the crews of destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, as well as destroyers Heerman and Hull, most of the group lived to fight another day. Finally, at 9:24 a.m., St. Lo reported that the enemy had ceased fire and was retreating. The Japanese, overwhelmed by the fierce defense put up by the American destroyers and their escorts, and because of the smoke, mistakenly believed they had encountered the bulk of the U.S. fleet and pulled back. The sailors aboard the surviving American ships felt a surge of relief as the enemy retreated. But for St. Lo, the real ordeal was just about to begin. Following the gun battle, many of the men aboard St. Lo made their way below decks to get breakfast, feeling safe. Barely an hour after the enemy had disappeared, the ship's general quarters alarm screamed once more. As some of the men stepped back outside, expecting to see the returning fleet, they were shocked to find something far worse than a Japanese convoy. Out of a rain squall came a lone A6M5 Zero fighter, part of the Shikishima Special Attack Unit, the first designated kamikaze unit of the war. At 10:53 a.m., the Zero, carrying a bomb under each wing, skimmed just 50 feet above St. Lo's deck, striking near the number 5 wire, just off the port side of the center line. Within moments, 2 powerful explosions ripped through the flight deck, tearing open massive sections. The bomb, quote, went through the wooden flight deck that we had and exploded in the hangar deck. And then he crashed his plane on the deck. And that explosion on the hangar deck. We blew ourselves apart from there because we were gassing up planes, bombs out, no real protection, fire. The torpedo bay blew. One crew member, Goheen, later recalled the chaos, saying he never even heard the explosion. Instead, he found himself floating through the air as if suspended in a surreal, peaceful moment. A third blast followed, violently ejecting the forward elevator from its shaft. Once the explosions reached the torpedo and bomb magazine, the escort carrier was rocked by a series of devastating blasts. Despite the crew's determination to fight the fires and save their ship, there was no denying it anymore. St. Lo was finished. Just before 11 a.m., Captain McKenna realized the ship was beyond saving. With all communications severed except for sound-powered telephones, the order spread through word of mouth. As many sailors jumped from the deck and swam into the vicinity of other nearby ships. Now engulfed in flame, St. Lo began to settle by the stern, slowly listing to port. The leader counted 8 explosions in total, 4 of them particularly devastating, before the flames consumed St. Lo, sending her to the depths at 11:25 a.m. In the end, the ship only held her name for 15 days before she was sunk. With this tragic incident, the escort carrier earned the title of the first major American ship to be sunk by a kamikaze attack. Unfortunately, USS St. Lo would not be the last to fall victim to the divine wind before the war's end. Old-timers blamed St. Lo's misfortune after surviving the big guns of Admiral Kurita's center force on the carrier's renaming. For nearly 75 years, the escort carrier rested unseen in the depths off the coast of Samar, until May 14, 2019, when undersea explorers aboard Paul G. Allen's research vessel Petrel finally located her. Lying upright over 14,000 feet beneath the surface of the Philippine Sea, St. Lo's battle scars remain starkly visible. Portions of her hull are torn apart by the explosions she endured. Her flight deck bears a gaping wound, and fragments of her anti-aircraft guns are scattered across the sea floor. Yet, despite it all, she stands firm on her keel.